Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined once again by Zach Goodall. And folks, it's finally time. Fall camp has arrived in Gainesville. As Steve Spurrier said, talking season is over. Obviously, we have a ton to talk about, but now they're back on the practice field. The real work is beginning after a long period of summer workouts, after spring camp. And there's a lot of concern, excitement, a good mix of the two in Gainesville for various reasons. Let's just dive right into it. On the last episode of the podcast, we joined you guys and talked about DJ Lagway and what we expected out of him. And Zach and I think both agreed that we expected him to be modified in a capacity once again, just not because we thought the shoulder was still something that was a massive concern, but because Florida's hopes are riding on DJ Lagway being successful, and you want to protect your quarterback. And Billy Napier understands how important he is to his future. And a couple days after we recorded our episode, we started to hear that DJ Lagway unfortunately had suffered another injury, a lower body injury, his second lower body injury this year. If you remember back in spring camp, it wasn't just the shoulder injury he was dealing with. He was also dealing with a sports hernia in his right hip, and that was leading him to be modified in practice along with the shoulder injury. And we saw some comments, and I'll address them right away, that were saying our comments about DJ Lagway were overblown, that we were fear-mongering in a sense here when it came to DJ Lagway's health. And now we're sitting here a week and a half later, and it once again is a topic of conversation because it emerged that near the end of summer workouts in a team lift, from what I have heard, Lagway suffered what has been described to me as a calf strain. He was in a walking boot. He still is hobbled a good bit from what I've heard as of today when we record this on August 1st. And those reports came out. We reported it over at Swamp247. If you want more context after listening to this podcast, go read our work over at Swamp247 and what we have said regarding what we have heard about DJ Lagway. But Billy Napier cleared it up on Tuesday when he came out and said that Lagway would begin fall camp as a limited participant. It was described as day-to-day by Florida's head coach. Now, that can mean a week, it can mean a week or two, it can mean 3 weeks. There's no desire to really rush him back from get him out on the practice field standpoint necessarily. But Billy Napier did acknowledge that it is disappointing for a second-year player to not be able to take the full amount of reps that you would desire for a guy like that. You know, we've touched on this repeatedly, but as impressive as Lagway was last season, there's still room for him to grow. Reading defenses, building a rapport, getting timing down with his wide receivers. It's hard to replace that. Film study can only do so much. You can know your guys inside and out through the locker room and being out there watching them, but until you're actually participating on the practice field and even in game situations, you're not fully going to build the rapport with those guys. So missing on that aspect, Billy Napier acknowledged that is undesirable for DJ Lagway. But Zach, I just want to get your take on what your thoughts are on DJ suffering another injury, because there already was this notion out there about him that he was I hate to use the cliche injury prone, but this was a guy that had a string of bad luck. The reports were that he had been dealing with injuries dating back to high school and had shoulder soreness even in fall camp last year due to the amount of work that he was doing. And then obviously the hamstring strain that he suffered against Georgia last year, and then missing most of spring camp and now going to be limited for at least the start of fall camp. Just what are your concerns about him and what he's missing out on right now? And do you think that it is still too early to put the term injury prone on DJ Lagway, or is that fair to say, just given everything he's had to deal with over the last year?
I think you can make the argument for and against that label. And I might be a bit long-winded with how I address this entire situation. But right, like you mentioned, we suggested even without knowledge of this calf strain at the time, because we recorded one on Tuesday, I believe. And I heard about his lower body injury at first, and there was some clarifying that needed to happen exactly to what it was. Now we know it's a calf strain on Friday. So we were going into this thinking he might be limited or modified just to, ease him back into work without this latest injury. You look at his history of injuries. I mean, shoot, he hurt his foot in the Under Armour All-American game before he even enrolled at Florida. Comes in, has the shoulder soreness that begins in fall training camp last year. I think we have reason to believe that that's sustained, that leading to the shoulder soreness that he dealt with throughout the spring and into the summer. I've even heard that, in the summer, they were managing a bit of soreness as well, not to say that he was limited. He got back out there and was throwing, I think Billy Napier said something about 200 some passes a week in May, but that they were still managing his shoulder because there would be some soreness flare-ups or even just trying to prevent anything potentially further occurring. You got the calf strain, you got the hamstrings strain from last season. The good thing about it is, yes, he's effectively been injured most of his Florida career at this point. I think that some might fairly label him injury prone as a result of that. The way I look at it, though, is aside from his shoulder being a bit consistently sore, and we've heard the possibility that he might need to have surgery on it eventually, and maybe that will clear it up. Everything else has not really been repeated injuries. They've all been unique. They've been independent. And that's what makes me hesitate on calling him injury prone. If he had repeated calf strains, repeated hamstring injuries, then I would start to wonder, okay, this is clearly a sensitive part of his body that is not holding up well to the physicality of this sport. That's just not been the case quite yet. So I hesitate to do that. When it comes to just how this impacts him, though, I completely agree. Yeah, he shined. And I think it's fair to say even through the injury, he played some of his best football last season. So that's why I also hesitate to really be concerned. But at the end of the day, he's a sophomore quarterback. There are things that he needs to grow upon naturally that we saw last year. And even without seeing it, that's just the learning curve of a 19-year-old quarterback entering his second season of college football with a lot of new receivers, for one, chemistry building. But there's just a development naturally that every quarterback has to go through. You got to be able to throw the football. You got to be able to participate in practice, log these reps, gain comfortability with the people that you're playing around. And I mean, I might have mentioned this last week. I came back to the Florida beat in January. It's been 7 months, pushing 8 months at this point. I've yet to see him throw one pass entering a pivotal year where, if all goes well and if he's healthy the entire way through, people do view him, I believe rightfully so, as a potential Heisman Trophy candidate. But in order to get there's a lot of development that he still is going to have to undergo, and there's no better way to do that than by getting practice reps, and he's just not been able to get them. So I understand where a lot of concerns come from at this point, and I think it's certainly my hope as someone that would like to see any player I cover succeed. I would like to see him back out there soon and putting these injuries behind him once and for all. It's been a bump in the road after a bump in the road after a bump in the road at this point.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that that's the narrative about him, because those who are around DJ Lagway have nothing but incredibly positive things to say about him, from his approach on game day to who he is as a person to being a vocal leader within the program. No one said a bad word about him whatsoever when it comes to who he is and his talent. But health is a realistic thing that you're going to have to overcome. It's a brutal sport. It's a physical sport. Guys are going to deal with bumps and bruises all the time. You're going to have to overcome them or fight through them. He's hardly the first who has had to manage an injury during the season or in the build-up to the season, and may have something lingering when the season gets here. He's hardly the first, and I know that he's trying to lead by example, so he's going to do whatever he can to be out there and fight through that. And that part of it, that narrative, is taking a back seat to the injury-prone one, which, fair or not, I'm not going to sit here and assess what's the more fair argument, but I think you could absolutely make a case for him being tougher than he gets credit for. Because go back to last season, he didn't complain about the shoulder soreness. He went out there and fought. He, revealed he was dealing with it and still was really, really effective. He didn't use it as an excuse whatsoever. And then the grade 2 hamstring strain, a lot of people were looking at that injury and wondering if that was the last we had seen of DJ Lagway as a freshman. and then he misses 6 quarters. That was the narrative about him, was that he was tough to come back. Clearly wasn't 100%, but he was still so effective, which is part of why people are so high on DJ Lagway, is because you saw him not even 100% last year be a really, really effective, explosive, dynamic, whatever you want to call it, quarterback. And so what could he do if he was fully healthy? Look how tough this guy is. If he's able to be fully healthy, Florida could be even more explosive and dynamic in 2025. And there's also the intangible factor of battling your own body in the public eye. DJ Lagway was well known as a senior coming out of Willis, Texas, but his profile is massive now. He's in commercials. He's, next to Patrick Mahomes in a commercial. He's doing T-Mobile ads. He's doing Gatorade ads with legends in sports. He is no longer just a budding star in high school. He is a guy that a lot of people, like you said, are looking at as, could this be a sophomore who contends for the Heisman Trophy? And all the same time, people are revealing opinions and takes and diagnosing him from afar. That's difficult to deal with as a 19, 20-year-old. That's difficult for anyone to deal with. People you don't know having an opinion on you. So, the fact that he's never complained about it, said a bad word, is able to make jokes about it, like we talked about last episode when he was at SEC Media Days 2 weeks ago in Atlanta. He joked about, I don't have a prosthetic arm. The reason he's making jokes about it, he's saying it in jest. It's really impressive. It shows his maturity. But yet the narrative out there about him is all about concern and being injury prone rather than not. This is someone who is in unfamiliar territory for a lot of people, and he's handling it with composure and poise. And as much as that should be commended, that is not the overwhelming narrative regarding him. And, this is a brutal sport and people aren't going to be too forgiving about that. So especially if you have high expectations for them. So it's a tough situation for him to be in. We're going to obviously keep tracking where he is, how much he's doing, what we're hearing, and hopefully here we're able to see him out, and you're finally going to be able to see him throw, Zach, for the first time since you've been back in Gainesville. Hopefully that will be where the narrative shifts when it comes to covering DJ Lagway, because like you said, so much of it has been discussing his injuries and his availability rather than his ability. So, they say that responsibility is not erased, it's just displaced. And so those reps in practice that may not be going to DJ Lagway are going to go to Florida's other signal callers on the roster, which there are 4 behind Lagway on scholarship. And it's an interesting quarterback battle. We've heard various things, but you're going to need to have a second quarterback available when you talk about DJ Lagway and his health. What if you lose him for a couple games or a significant portion of the season? Having someone ready and available to step in and not let there be a noticeable or even a significant drop-off offensively is absolutely part of that depth building process that Billy Napier has repeatedly discussed throughout the last year. If you've been listening to Napier, he's obviously extremely high on the talent that the Florida Gators have on their roster. He's just noted that they need to continue building depth. And at the quarterback position, I think that is absolutely a key one. Let's go back nearly 8-9 months just to go over Florida's quarterback room. When Lagway went down last year, Aiden Warner stepped in, and I think Aiden would be the first to tell you that the results were not ideal for him. I think he was 7 of 22 passing against Georgia. He wasn't much better a week later against Texas. Florida was in those games. They were tied with 7 minutes to go against Georgia. The Texas game, they didn't really have a chance in. They couldn't move the ball successfully downfield against a really, really good Texas team. But Aiden Warner had his own struggles to overcome. He had an ACL tear that was, I don't want to say misdiagnosed. Maybe it was missed, the severity of the injury, and he ends up missing 7-8 months, gets healthy in fall camp, moves up the depth chart. Graham Mertz and then DJ Lagway go down, and then they turn to Aiden Warner, who has continued to improve. But then obviously Florida is looking to add 2 quarterbacks in the offseason. They flipped Tramel Jones Jr. from Florida State. He comes in nursing his own injury with some recovery to do, dealing with, I believe, an ankle injury that he sustained in high school. He's limited to start here when it comes to offseason workouts. He's able to do some work in spring camp. but they also want to add a guy who's not entirely fresh-faced, and the Gators added one of the top underclassmen quarterbacks available in the portal in Charlotte transferred Deshaun Purdy. Now, Purdy gets to Gainesville, and I don't know if he was misled or had some preconceived notions or aspirations that he thought he would come in and contend for the starting job. Everyone who's been following the Gators since dating back to DJ Lagway's arrival knew that this would be the guy that you would be turning to as your starting quarterback in 2025. And obviously with his health, Purdy could be the number 2 guy who has a very similar skill set where you would have the ability to run still the majority of your offense if Lagway is unavailable. Now, Purdy ends up asking out of his signed financial affidavit. He ends up landing at Wake Forest, a team with a very, very manageable schedule. You could make a case that is the easiest schedule in all of Power 4 football, and he is probably going to step in as the starting quarterback. No offense to the Demon Deacons. I haven't been following their battles in fall camp, but I would assume based on what Purdy did last year at Charlotte that this is going to give him a chance to start. With a lot of other quarterback options off the table, the Gators had to look around the country, and they landed on Harrison Bailey. Now, Harrison Bailey is a well-known player, especially in the SEC. He went to Tennessee. He was even at Friday Night Lights back at Florida. It feels like half a decade ago. I think it was half a decade ago. That's how long he's been in college football. Yeah, it seems like 6, maybe 7 years ago. And then he goes to UNLV and goes back in the portal, and Florida reaches out, and he ends up coming to Gainesville ahead of spring camp. That leads me to where we are right now. Aiden Warner has the most experience on the field for the Gators and within Florida's offense when it comes to guys who have played. Now, obviously, Clay Millen is there as well, but I don't know if we can expect anything out of Clay Millen this year whatsoever, considering we didn't see him in a game last year, even though he had started at Nevada and Colorado State. From everything that I've heard, while there still is going to be an evaluation process, it seems like the number 2 quarterback on Florida's depth chart right now is Aiden Warner. And that is a really, really interesting thing to follow, because you would tend to look outside and say, well, they're going to have to go with the guys who have experience or have started. And that's Bailey and Clay Millen. And you also could note that, hey, maybe we want to get reps for Jones if he's fully healthy to prepare him for when it is his chance to compete for the starting role. But Aiden Warner is a guy that has improved. He has the experience. What he did last year was noble. I've noted this on the message board. I know some people have disagreed with me, but stepping in against Georgia and Texas is a daunting experience, and people, are going to come away with a negative impression of a Yale transfer making their first collegiate snaps in the SEC against Georgia and Texas, the 2 teams that battled for the SEC championship. So, Zach, with all that said, I know I was long-winded here. From what you heard Billy Napier say the other day and what we've heard out of Florida's offense, do you get the sense, and from what you're hearing, that Aiden Warner right now has an edge on Harrison Bailey as the number 2 guy? And with that said, if that's the case, how much concern do you have that there would be a significant drop-off if Aiden Warner has to take the field for the Gators in a relief capacity when you get into SEC play? And I'm not talking about getting him snaps against Long Island and USF, because let me make it abundantly clear. I think that due to Lagway's situation and managing his workload, it would make a ton of sense to have him not have to go out there and throw 30 times against the Bulls or against Long Island. With all that said, what do you make of the Aiden Warner, Harrison Bailey talk of battling for the backup role in Florida?
Yeah, what did we say last week when we were talking about Long Island and DJ before this new injury popped up? It was like, 7 to 10 passing attempts is all we should see out of him in that game if he's able to go. I agree with you that as of now, and obviously we've got a few weeks where this could change. You look at the video of Dallas Wilson making that reception the other day. It was quite a nice pass, and that came from Harrison Bailey. So who's to say that things won't change if he keeps dropping dimes like that? But I would say that Warner does have the edge based on, obviously the things you and I have heard. Aiden Warner being working with the projected first team in the orange and blue game for one. even the other day when Billy Napier came out and was asked specifically about Harrison Bailey, when we had gotten through the ringer on DJ questions, someone asked about what he thinks of Harrison Bailey in this position. Napier said something to the effect of, excited about all of our quarterbacks. And before he even said Bailey's name, he went right to Aiden Warner and said, in particular, Aiden Warner has made some progress. And that's a paraphrase, but effectively what he said. Then called Harrison Bailey a veteran player. So when you read between the lines like that, you see what we've seen in the past. I mean, even going back to last season, you mentioned Clay Millen. And I would, at this point, I think, be surprised if we ever saw Clay Millen throw a pass for Florida, unless it got down to Warner, Lagway, even Bailey getting hurt. Then you got to make a decision between him and Tramel Jones, the freshman. But even at that point, right, Warner coming off of his injury from the year before, walk on for Florida, steps in against Georgia, starts against Texas, two of the toughest, definitely the toughest games on Florida's schedule last year. All of this speaks to how much they like Aiden Warner, which is why I would give him the edge until proven otherwise. And again, I want to allow the room for maybe Harrison Bailey to be able to do that. Lest we forget, Harrison Bailey made his first ever start of his college career here in the Swamp with Tennessee against Florida back in 2020. And it's obviously been a long and winding road for him. He went to go compete for other starting jobs when it was clear his future wasn't at Tennessee. Did not win those starting jobs, maintained backup status, would spot start, come in and play in relief. And I think that a lot is made of his Sun Bowl performance with Louisville against Washington this past offseason. So there's certainly positives there. Like you look at his numbers, I think in particular, he's a pretty strong intermediate passer. So if you were to put him on the field, you at least have something to work with. You're not entirely relying on some dink and dunk West Coast kind of offense just to try and keep the chains moving and keep the run game strong. I think that there's still something to work with there. But the way I read it, again, like until proven otherwise, Florida has made their impression of Aiden Warner very clear, very known. They think highly of him, probably more so than Florida fans or outsiders who watch those 6 quarters from last year do. And that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, maybe when we get to see these practices and if we can tell that there's a clear difference in the two and that maybe Bailey appears much more comfortable, like a stronger option, and they continue to roll with Warner, then I think that there will be some questions posed at the time. But who knows? At the same time, Aiden Warner, while the results were discouraging last year, there's a lot that we don't get to see. He was really thrown into the fire, so to speak. And who's to say that an off season's worth of development in full health as well won't at least do him some wonders in terms of him becoming a more comfortable player at the SEC level. Time will tell.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns there. Like you said, also a lot can change in the next 29 days. Bailey could, usurp Warner and be the number 2 guy, or Warner can continue holding on to it here. It's going to be really interesting to see. But I think from the good news perspective for those guys is they're going to get an abundance of reps in fall camp here, just with the status of DJ Lagway. But we've talked enough about DJ Lagway. Obviously, he is the most well-known player on Florida's roster from fans in Gainesville and people outside, the national media and casual observers of the SEC. He's the most well-known, but I thought it was really interesting the other day that Billy Napier made it clear that it's the supporting cast for DJ Lagway that is going to be maybe what takes Florida over the top, because, as important as the quarterback position is, and I'm not saying it's not, I do agree that it's the most important position on the field. You're not going to win solely with world-class caliber quarterback if you don't have effective play on the line of scrimmage, you don't have key depth, and you don't have talent at the skill positions. And from those who are following Florida, that is one of the strengths, in my opinion, about this current roster. You have a ton of talent at wide receiver. You bring back your top 2 running backs from last season after Montrell Johnson Jr. and Trayon Webb suffered injuries. More than 3,000 snaps on the offensive line. You have key players on defense. You get Grayson Howard, Tyreek Sapp, Caleb Banks back. You get both your starting safeties. You get a starting cornerback and Devin Moore back. And that is, I think, maybe what's being a little bit overlooked is the overall depth on this roster and the continuity aspect. And Billy Napier was pretty quick to want to turn the conversation to those guys, because that is, I think, just as important to Florida, if not maybe more important than having DJ Lagway out there. It's just the depth that they have across the team. And Lagway is also not the only injured player that we are monitoring at a key position. We're going to talk about two real quickly here before we wrap up this episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. First, I want to get your thoughts on the battle at nose tackle, because that is, I think, a very critical one. The depth at the interior of the defensive line. Obviously, you get Caleb Banks back. You added some interesting pieces in the portal and at the high school level as well. But you get a guy back in Jamari Lyons, who he suffered a devastating injury last year, fractured ankle. I remember when it happened, the whole team was around him. It happened in the swamp during a fall camp scrimmage. He goes down, and as Tyler Miles, Florida's director of strength and conditioning, noted the other day, he could have walked away from football. It was that gruesome, that difficult to overcome, not just from a physical standpoint, but mentally, knowing that you could go back out on that field and suffer another injury like that, and then you turn your attention to rehabilitating and when am I going to get back and fighting against your body. But if he is fully healthy, there is a notion to believe that he is going to step into a starting role at nose tackle. Now, they have other guys there, Tavoris Brown, Brendan Bett, Mekhi Barrow continues to change his body. He's down to 349 pounds. He got to Gainesville last year at 383 and just is in much, much better shape than he was 18 months ago. But if Jamari Lyons is fully healthy, do you expect him to be Florida's starter week one at nose tackle as he continues to have this, recovery process that the final step will be getting back to where he was, if not better, than a year ago, where he was poised to play a large role along the interior. And now he has a chance to start for Florida. Do you think that, from what you've heard, that that's the expectation in your mind right now? Or do you think they're going to continue to evaluate the competition there and we could see a little bit more of a rotation, especially in the early weeks, to keep evaluating options?
Yeah, I don't mean to spoil where we'll transition next, but outside of DJ Lagway's injury, easily the next two most important recoveries to me are Lyons. I would say he's number one if you remove Lagway. Number two being Aaron Gates, and I'll save the Aaron Gates part for later, just because of what those players bring to those positions and what those positions need. Jamari Lyons, I thought his 2023 film, and it was just a shade under 200 snaps played within a rotation with Cam Jackson, with Caleb Banks, with Desmond Watson. He still got pretty meaningful playing time. It was really impressive play. I think he had 20 tackles, and PFF considers 11 of them to be stops, which are positive tackles, ones where 1st and 10, let's call it a stop for a 2-yard gain, or even in the backfield. 3rd and 3 would make a tackle short of the line to gain. That's how they qualify those. So more than half of his tackles were considered very quality plays. And he also didn't miss a tackle that season too. So while it was in a limited role within a rotation, I believe he made one start. It was inspiring play for then a redshirt freshman to step in and make an impact. So as long as he's fully healthy, and the way I saw it, even back in March when he was limited, to me, he didn't look like a 300-plus pound nose tackle coming off of a fractured ankle. There was ankle flexion there, explosion out of his stance in these individual drills we got to see. He looked like he was on a really great trajectory toward a full recovery. And now we're even several months removed from that. And you alluded to what Tyler Miles was saying the other day, that he didn't want to discredit Aaron Gates, but when you look at the two of them, he came away more impressed by what Lyons was able to do for a player of his size, for a player to have suffered such a gruesome injury, and the way he attacked this rehabilitation, attacked their off-season workouts. He came away really impressed by what he saw. And with that in mind, I think that the arrow is pointing up for Jamari Lyons to take on the starting role. Maybe it's not in week one as they ease him in, but I would imagine that when all is said and done, he ends up starting quite a bit at that position next to Caleb Banks. And I do want to clarify too, it's important to remember they really heavily rely on a rotation, right? I mentioned the 2023 rotation. Obviously, last year they had 2 nose tackles, and I know Cam Jackson would move around a little bit, but he and Desmond Watson both played a significant amount to the point where, sure, Cam Jackson may have had more starts. What does the starting role really matter when they're both playing as much as they are? So When you look at Florida's interior defensive line as a whole, obviously you've got Caleb Banks coming back to headline the position. He's got 780, I want to say 6 snaps in his 2 years with Florida. The rest of the group combined has 720. The other 6 defensive tackles, or maybe 7 if you include Tarvarius Brown, in their careers. So they're riding on a lot of potential here. Not so much proof is in the pudding compared to last season when you have a Jackson, when you have a Watson coming back to that line. There's roles that certainly need to be figured out. I would expect a lot of these guys to contribute significantly. Mekhi Barrow being another one, like you mentioned. He came in and I want to say had 120, 140 snaps as a freshman and continues to work on his body. I would imagine as long as Jamari Lyons is healthy that he and Barrow end up doing a good split at that nose tackle position while they've continued to figure out what the depth and even what a rotation looks like with Caleb Banks at the more traditional 3 technique, 2 to 4 technique, I guess you could consider it, defensive tackle spot. Maybe Brendan Bett, and someone that they're high on, someone that Ron Roberts has a little bit of familiarity with from his time at Baylor when he recruited him there, who put some really impressive play out on the field during his freshman season at Baylor before missing the 2024 season largely due to academic issues. There's a lot of potential there. We consider it kind of a weak spot when you look across this entire roster and you can see the depth that's been built, but that's not to suggest they don't have talent on their 2 interior positions. It's more that players are going to have to prove themselves. And Jamari Lyons being a perfect example where there's been a lot of positive flashes, but how ready is he to go after such a devastating injury?
Yeah, it certainly is going to be one where I expect Florida to rotate just how much you're asking guys to do in there. And that's why having depth, maybe, even if you have to rely on the freshmen, we mentioned Mekhi Barrow playing nearly 150 snaps last year as a freshman. If you can get 150 or even 100 snaps out of either of the freshmen they added in Joseph Mbachu or Jeremiah McLeod, that would be a big win for Florida. And then obviously Brown, I think he's a little bit slept on because he was a guy who was added to the roster as a preferred walk-on this time last year. He's lean for 300 pounds, and then adding Bet, I think that one flew under the radar a little bit, but that was a big loss for Baylor. If you look at the fan reactions to him leaving, they thought that they were going to get a guy who was going to come back for his 3rd season and be a consistent starter. So those 6 guys that we've mentioned there along the interior, I think we're going to see a ton of them all this season. And I'm interested to see how much Lyons is able to lead the way potentially here if he is fully healthy. Now, another position, and you already touched on it, that is going to rotate a ton this year is that star nickelback position. We saw Sharif Denson and Aaron Gates last year both play a ton last year for Florida. They rotated consistently. And then Aaron Gates went down with an injury in the SEC finale against Ole Miss really early in the game. Devastating knee injury for him. And initially I was thinking that he would need a little bit more time to get fully back to where he was. Obviously the ACL recovery, but he also had other damage to the ligaments in his knee. And to be able to, at this point, 9 months removed, be in contention to be back by the season opener, I think is massive for Florida. If Aaron Gates is fully healthy by week 1 or even by week 3 when Florida has to go to LSU for that night game in Baton Rouge, if Aaron Gates is fully back to where he was last season, how massive do you think that is for Florida's secondary?
I think it's pivotal. I mean, he came in and really impressed in that star role. And you mentioned the extent to which his knee was injured beyond the ACL. That goes without mentioning. This is not the first time he's torn an ACL before, had a devastating knee injury. His senior season of high school, he had the same injury. And you'll have to forgive me, I forget if it were to different knees or the same one. I believe they were different knees. But still, when you hear about that, 2 major knee injuries in 3 years, it's another one of those where you might wonder, like, what does the future for this player look like in football? How tough is that going to be for them to recover? Will that do much to them? His recovery, it's just phenomenal timing and the way he's been able to attack it. I'm sure you've seen the videos that have gone on social media he's posted of his workouts. I mean, shoot, even in like May, June, there were times in spring camp while he was not practicing, he was still out there jogging around and able to, at least work out in some capacity. It's really impressive. And B, too, on the flip side, you look at it and he's been through the recovery of such an injury before. So he's got a bit of a heads up and an understanding of how he needs to navigate this, so long as he is cleared for the season. And I would expect that we'll see him in some capacity when we're out there, because Billy Napier said he may not necessarily be a full practice participant, but he's been full participation in the things they were doing leading up to fall camp. So as long as he's good, I mean, yeah, that rotation at star is very strong, in my opinion. You've got two experienced players. They were recruited to play the position. Both he and Denson are strong coming downhill, and I think Gates has a bit of an advantage when it comes to dropping back in coverage. But that's one of those spots, too, where it's not like your traditional defensive back always dropping back into coverage. Like, you've got responsibility to key the run game like a linebacker almost. And they've got two really polished players, in my opinion, there that form a healthy rotation when they're both good to go.
Yeah, I think it's huge for Florida. When Aaron Gates has been out there, he has just been a reliable tackler, knows what he's doing, confident player, someone who leads by example. And it would be huge for Florida's secondary if he is fully ready to go. And I do think we'll see some of the other guys in the rotation behind him and Denson this season, and Josiah Davis. And I think we'll see some Michael Caraway Jr., the transfer from Southern Mississippi that they added to the roster as well, who's going to take some snaps there. So if all goes according to plan, I don't expect any drop-off whatsoever from Florida at that star spot, getting their two guys from last year back. And if Gates is fully healthy and improved, or even back to the level he was at last year, I think it's going to be huge for Florida. I'm really looking forward to being out there tomorrow. For the first time, we're going to see fall camp. We haven't had a chance to be out there. Like I said at the beginning, this is the most limited access in my 11 years covering the Florida Gators when it comes to being out there for fall camp. I think we can understand why when they're trying to limit information getting out regarding DJ Lagway and some of the other players, but we're finally going to have a chance to watch, for the only time in fall camp, a full practice session tomorrow. That session is also open to members of Florida Victorious, Florida's affiliated NIL collective. So it is going to be an exciting time Saturday afternoon in Gainesville. We're going to be able to watch practice. But that's going to do it for us for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. We'll be back next week with plenty of information talking about what we've learned and viewed, observed from being out there at practice. Hopefully we're going to get another opportunity in the next week. But that's going to do it for us. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.